Okay, so today we're diving deep into some pretty big news in the AI world, specifically at OpenAI,
Right.
the company behind ChatGPT, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And you and I have both been following this whole thing pretty closely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this isn't just like your regular, tech company shakeup.
Right.
It's
big. This is a big one. Yeah.
Yeah, this has some major implications, I think, for the future of AI.
Yeah, you're right. This isn't just some, changing of the guard at the top.
Right.
This really has, like you said, major implications for where AI goes from here.
Okay, so this all started with Mira Murati stepping down as CTO
Right.
of OpenAI.
Yeah.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Executives, they leave companies all the time.
Sure.
Right. That's not news.
That's not news. No.
But this isn't just any executive.
Right.
And this isn't just any company.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, Mira Murati was, she was really instrumental in ChatGPT's development.
Yeah, and not just from a technology standpoint, which obviously she was incredibly involved in that.
Right.
But she was also really, I think, a very vocal advocate for the ethical side of AI.
Yes.
Which I think is something that often gets kind of left behind in the rush to develop these technologies as quickly as possible.
Yeah, she was a voice of caution in a field that doesn't have a lot of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So she's not the only one who's heading for the door, though.
Right.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay.
Because we've also had Bob McGrew, who was OpenAI's director of research.
Yeah.
And Barrett Soff, their VP of research. They've both left recently as well.
Wow.
So that's 3 major players.
Yeah.
Gone in a pretty short span of time.
Yeah, you can't look at that and say it's just coincidence, right?
Right. Exactly. It feels like a pattern.
Yeah.
And you start to wonder, what does that mean?
Absolutely, yeah. And the whole industry is kind of, a buzz with trying to figure out, like, what does this mean for OpenAI?
Yeah.
And it's not just them, right? I mean, you've got other companies like Anthropic, which was actually founded by former OpenAI folks,
right,
who are, very aggressively recruiting in this space as well. And of course, you've got the giants like Google, Microsoft, pouring tons and tons of resources into their AI
initiatives.
Right. So you've got to wonder, like, what does this mean for OpenAI? Can they, they've done some promoting from within. Yeah. They've got Mark Chen stepping up as the senior VP of research.
Right.
And Matt Knight as the new chief information security officer.
Yeah.
But those are big shoes to fill,
Huge shoes to fill.
Especially when you're talking about a company that's burning through an estimated $700,000 a day.
Yeah.
Just to keep ChatGPT running.
I mean, and that's really the crux of it, right? I mean, developing this kind of cutting edge AI.
Yeah.
It's incredibly expensive.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about these massive data sets that you need.
Right.
You need just enormous computing power.
Yeah.
And it all adds up to that astronomical daily cost that you just mentioned, which it makes you wonder, like, how sustainable is this?
Right, yeah.
Even for a company like OpenAI.
Yeah.
Are they feeling the heat?
Well, and they're clearly thinking about it because, they've even floated this idea of maybe shifting to like a partly for-profit model,
right,
to try to attract more investment.
Which is interesting because they've always been, very much like we're doing this for the good of humanity,
right? But
$700,000 a day.
Yeah, I mean that'll make you rethink some things,
really,
right?
You think?
And so I think that's the multi-million, maybe billion-dollar question here is can they actually balance this need for funding with this commitment that they've made to ethical AI development? Because those two things, at some point, those might be, directly at odds with each other.
They might be, yeah.
Especially as the pressure, to generate revenue increases.
Right.
Right. If you're a for-profit company, or even partly for-profit,
right.
Suddenly those ethical considerations, they might take a back seat.
Right. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because it's like this whole thing with OpenAI was sort of built on this idea of democratizing AI.
Right.
Making sure it benefits everyone.
Right. Yeah.
But then you have this very real need to stay afloat.
Absolutely.
In a field that is just so expensive.
Yeah. It's a tough needle to thread for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, you start to get into this really interesting conversation about different approaches to AI development.
Okay.
Because it's not just about how much money you throw at the problem.
Right.
It's also about the kind of like the fundamental technical choices
Right.
that you make along the way.
Okay, so break that down for me a little bit.
Yeah. So take ChatGPT as an example, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's built on this model called a transformer,
Right.
which has been, it's been revolutionary for natural language processing.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly computationally intensive.
Right.
Right. And I think that's part of what explains those,
Yeah.
eye-watering running costs. Right. But then you compare that to other approaches that are being explored, right? Like, you look at a company like Anthropic, for example, they're much more focused on kind of developing these systems that are more aligned with, human values that are, they're really emphasizing safety, predictability.
Okay. So it's not as simple as just like, everybody's working on AI.
Right.
There are these different avenues that people are going down.
Totally. And those different approaches, they come with their own sets of trade-offs.
Of course.
Right. So OpenAI, with their focus on really pushing the boundaries of what's possible, they may be racking up these higher costs.
Right. But they're also making, you can't argue that they're not making significant strides in areas like, language understanding, language generation.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you've got companies like I said, like an Anthropic, where they're prioritizing different values. And that might lead to maybe, a slightly slower pace of progress in certain areas. But potentially a more kind of, cautious and measured approach to actually deploying these technologies.
Yeah, it's like choosing between, a speedboat and a cargo ship.
Totally.
Like they can both get you across the ocean.
Yeah.
But they're different.
Yeah. No, that's a great analogy. And it depends what you're optimizing for, right?
Totally. And I think, just like with ships, right? I mean, the choice of which one you use depends on the destination, right? Like what are you actually optimizing for? Is it speed? Is it safety? Is it capacity?
Right.
And I think in the world of AI, these are the kinds of questions that companies like OpenAI are really grappling with right now, especially in light of, of these departures.
Right, and it's not just theoretical.
No,
like this is having real world applications.
Yeah,
I mean, this technology is seeping into our lives in so many ways.
Yeah,
from the way we search for information to the way we create art.
Yeah, and I think as it becomes more and more powerful, the stakes just get higher. Right. And that's why I think, these leadership changes at OpenAI are so significant.
Yeah.
Because I think they really do represent a potential shift in direction, Yeah. Like a fork in the road for one of the most influential players in this whole space.
Yeah. And it really makes you think, too, about just the human element of all this,
Yeah.
Like we talk about AI, it's this like,
this big force,
autonomous force.
Right.
But there are real people behind it.
Absolutely.
Who are making these decisions, writing the code.
Yeah.
And I'm sure facing immense pressure to develop this technology that, like we said, could literally reshape the world.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that, when you're caught up in reading the headlines about, the latest breakthrough, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We don't often stop and think about like the toll it takes on the actual people who are doing this work,
And I think Murati's departure is kind of a prime example of that, right? I mean, you're talking about someone who was at the top of their game, deeply involved in not just shaping the technology, but the whole like ethical conversation around it.
The conversation around it.
To walk away from that, that says something, I think.
Yeah. No, it definitely raises some, some important questions about burnout, pressure. There's just the sustainability of this, kind of breakneck pace of innovation that we're seeing,
Right. Is it even possible for people to keep up with this?
Yeah.
in a healthy way, right? Like, are we creating an environment where the best minds, like, they almost feel forced to choose between their well-being and their work?
Right. And I think, the thing is we need those bright minds, engaged and firing on all cylinders, like you said, if we actually want this technology,
of course,
to reach its full potential.
Right.
But we also, I think, need them to be human. Like, we need them to be able to bring their whole selves to the table. Not just,
not just their coding brains.
Exactly. Like, their humanity is important too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point, and it's one that I think, often gets lost in all of this.
Yeah, and that's where I think the conversation needs to go next, right? Like, how do we actually create a healthier and more sustainable ecosystem for AI development, How do we make sure that these ethical considerations and just frankly like human well-being are not afterthoughts, but are actually like core principles
that are driving this whole technological revolution,
Those are big questions.
They're big questions.
And I don't envy the people who have to like actually sit down and figure out the answers.
Right.
But I think it's a conversation that we can't afford to ignore.
No.
You know what I mean? Like the future of AI and arguably like our own future kind of depends on getting this right.
It really does. Yeah, well said. And I think, for those of you listening, it's easy to get caught up in all the excitement and the hype.
Yeah.
But I think this is a really valuable reminder that, behind all the algorithms, there are human stories.
Yeah.
And those stories matter.
They do. They really do. And they ultimately, they shape the impact that this technology has on our world.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Again, fascinating stuff.
Absolutely.
As always, and thanks for taking the time to break it all down with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And to all of you listening out there, as always, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.